Today on The Simple Truth, it is Testimony Tuesday, where we bring you real, live, first-hand testimonial accounts of the life-giving reality of Jesus and his Catholic Church. We consecrate everything to the Sacred Heart of Jesus through the Immaculate Heart of Mary and the pure, strong heart of Saint Joseph. Our guest today is John Mark Miravalle. He is a Catholic husband and father and professor of systematic and moral theology at Mount St. Mary's Seminary in Maryland. He's also an author of several books, including Beauty, What It Is and Why It Matters. And you can find that at sophiainstitute.com. Some other books as well. We'll get into his good work as we go today. But this is also something of a two-part special. We're going to have John Mark share some of his testimony here today, some of his story. And then next week, he's going to be back with us again, God willing, to dive deeper into that book on beauty. I found that a couple months ago and was just blown away by it. So looking forward to diving deep on that and sharing that with you as well next week. But John Mark Miravalle, welcome to The Simple Truth. Thank you for being with us today. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me, Jim.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for being here with us. And we always begin at the beginning. So let's start with childhood. What was your early life like, your family, the culture that you grew up in?
So I'm very blessed in countless ways, but few more profoundly than my parents, who were very devout. My dad's a theology teacher. He's also bald like I am, so it's obviously some kind of genetic disorder that we hope to isolate before it afflicts my kids. But my mom was one of that first generation of homeschool moms. Daily rosary, daily mass, priority on getting to heaven as opposed to getting ahead in this world. I'm the oldest of 8 kids, so I can't be more grateful to my mom and dad for giving me everything that they possibly could, teaching me everything they possibly could, and especially teaching me the faith and a habit of prayer. So strong start, and none of my doing.
Yeah, phenomenal. So as that strong start progressed in those young years, what was it like then, the culture, I guess, surrounding that? Because it's one thing for a mom and dad to say, all right, we're gonna really strive to live this well and hand this on to our children, the Catholic faith, share the real deal with them and grow them the right way here. But it can be difficult. You got to find some good Catholic community as well. What was that like as they tried to form that Catholic community? Was that hard to find, or was that something that was also quite blessed?
Yeah, also quite blessed. We lived a little bit out of town, but my dad teaches at Steubenville. He's taught at Steubenville for 35 plus years, Franciscan University. And one of the great things when I was growing up is not only did you have a pretty vibrant homeschool community, even in that first generation, but because of that, you also had a lot of the dads pitching in to teach classes for the group of kids. So, for instance, I had Dr. Regis Martin, who taught us literature. My dad was the basketball coach. We had another professor who taught us Euclid. So it was really a wonderful community effort in not just normalizing the faith, but also giving us the best of what all of our parents had to offer.
Yeah, that's about as good as it gets. And yeah, for those that are familiar, Dr. Mark Miravalle, he's a blessing for sure for those that know him and his good work as well. So that's John Mark's dad. And so, yeah, Dr. Martin there and others, teaching you guys, the truth. Not just on a theological level, but also philosophy. It sounds like across the board, a really strong formation. What was it like with your peers? Was everybody kind of getting this and it just bearing great fruit in your lives? If so, what kind of was that like? Because that seems like that's the vision we want to try to fulfill throughout all of our lives and our families and our communities. I'm sure there's still, cracks in the system. There's still temptations. There's still concupiscence and all of this. Anything you want to share, I guess, about struggles or difficulties, or just maybe even the fruitfulness that you encountered as you continued to grow?
That's a great question. That's a heavy question. I'll say that because it was, again, to my way of thinking, it was really the launching of a new cultural norm, right? So for now, today, everybody has heard about homeschoolers. Everybody's heard about large Catholic families. Back then, it was newer. And so you did have, I think, a lot more fear from a lot more folks. You had a lot more pressure. You had a lot more concerns from, let's say, extended family. Sometimes you had people from rougher backgrounds who kind of launched into it midway and were still bearing the scars of their past or the wounds from their past. So no, it certainly wasn't swimming, and not all the marriages in the group survived. Certainly not all the kids in the group retained their faith or acted on it. I don't know that I have any great insights as a result of that, except, well, I'll tell you this. I'll tell you what I've said to my kids is, look, either there's free will, in which case my parenting won't determine your life, no matter how good or bad it is, or there's no free will and I couldn't have been a better parent anyway, so I'd be off the hook in any case. So I do think that there's lots of free will, there's lots of woundedness, there's lots of problems, certainly in that community. But in terms of the truth being offered on the natural and supernatural level, yeah, it was offered, even if not all the examples were optimal.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Yeah. So your sense then in the sacramental life, so you're baptized, I'm sure, pretty quickly as an infant. And then, so first penance, first confession, first Holy Communion, confirmation. What was it like as somebody who, I'm guessing, as you're receiving these sacraments, you really have a strong sense. You had a good formation. This is Jesus. This is the sacramental life. He died to give us in his Catholic Church. I get to receive this. Anything you can share with us about the sacramental life in your experience?
Yeah, for me, the sacramental life was often not sort of, it was the basis. So it was presumed, I think, not in a bad way, in a good way. Again, we were daily mass goers, a lot of adoration, obviously receiving the sacraments regularly. For me, one of, I think, the distinctive things that I benefited from is I'm a very sort of analytic guy, sort of logic choppy by instinct. As a kid, I liked to argue way too much, and so I was very delighted, and I'm still very grateful that every time I had a question, someone in our community had a good answer. So I remember my dad, I think I was 11 or 12, and he cracked the Summa for me the first time because I had some question, I don't remember what it was, but he said, oh, let's see what St. Thomas says. Here's how you use this. Yeah, I'm awfully grateful for that. And now I teach philosophy and theology to our little group of homeschool kids to try to pay that forward, because that was very important to me.
Yeah, awesome. John Mark Miravalle here with us. And so as you were growing then, getting a little bit older, maybe middle school, high school years, what was your sense of vocation, discerning vocation? Was this something that was just natural, that everybody would be discerning vocation, and that it would not be some big deal and some anxiety-filled sort of thing, but just something that flowed from a life of prayer, and again, the sacraments being at the core? And what is our Lord calling me to do? How is he calling me to live definitively in a vocation? And just anything you want to share with us about your formation on that and your experience of discerning that as you started to grow older.
Yeah. So I actually have a lot of ideas about that based on my experience. And now, of course, I teach at a seminary, and a lot of guys are still in the process of discerning their vocation when they show up. So my personal experience was absolute anxiety and panic. It was, I think, rooted in this idea that God has a particular role for your life, and he's trying to send you the message all the time, but you have to figure out how you're going to receive that message. So the way I thought about vocation for a long time was, God is sending me a message on some radio frequency. And when I go to prayer, when I go to holy hour, when I pray my rosary, I should be fiddling with those AM, FM knobs and trying to find the darn frequency so I know what to do, because he's sending me the message to either be a priest or to be married. And I got to figure out which it is, because he's got a plan A for my life. And if I screw this discernment up, if I don't twiddle the knobs right, I'll be stuck living a plan B life, and that'll be a total drag. So actually, that was a big process, trying to overcome that paradigm of discernment, which was kind of common in my circle growing up and even in my college experience. That was a lot of people thought about discernment in those terms. And now I'm a much bigger believer in the steps of prudence as laid out by the church's virtue heritage as a way of making even big decisions.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I think we're about to hit a break in just a couple of minutes, but maybe we can take a little stop here. Anything that you want to share with us now about that prudence that you mentioned? Anything quickly that could be helpful to us on that account?
Yeah, just very quickly, the Lord has given us the virtue of prudence. That's what we use to know His will. It's not necessarily mystical intuition. It's deliberation, judgment, and then trying to persevere until God tells you otherwise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's well said. Yeah, I think, we can always, and we ought to, bring everything to the Lord in the life of prayer and be wide open to receive whatever it is He wants to give us. If nothing specific is coming from the Lord as a very clear directive, then the prudence is the way. And to remain wide open and to continue to just hand Him over everything. And sometimes you will get a good prompting from the Lord that is a great gift. And then we say yes to that. But otherwise, we just keep going, taking that next right step that's in front of us based on reason soaked in His grace. We'll be right back. Stay tuned. Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with our guest today, John Mark Miravalle, on this Testimony Tuesday. He's a professor of systematic and moral theology at Mount St. Mary's Seminary in Maryland, also the author of several books, including Beauty, What It Is and Why It Matters. You can get this at sophiainstitute.com, as well as How to Feel Good and How Not to, the ethics of using marijuana, alcohol, antidepressants, and other mood-altering drugs, as well as Thinking Clearly, Catholic Philosophy for a Culture in Chaos. Sounds like some great titles there. We're going to get to John Mark's good work in just a little bit. But we left off, so high school years, moving into then figuring out, I guess, the college years. And so you grow up in the Steubenville area. Was it pretty much a no-brainer, a foregone conclusion, go to Franciscan University where your dad's a professor, go there for college, for undergrad, or was there any other choices on the table? Anything you want to share there?
No, I was pretty itching to get out of the house. And so I started taking classes pretty early. So I was lucky even Steubenville accepted me on campus as young as I was. So the goal was just to get me somewhere and get me there quick. Not that I was getting into trouble, but I was a handful at home, just a big personality. And so Steubenville was sort of a no-brainer just in terms of it was free tuition with my dad teaching there, and it was close, and I could move quickly.
Great. Well, hey, a great blessing. And so you were a little bit younger than normal heading to Franciscan then?
Yeah. So I started taking the community college classes at 13, and then I moved on campus at 16, and then I graduated at 18. So I was able to lock that down pretty quick.
Wow, that's very cool. And so then did you stay there for graduate studies, or did you go somewhere else?
No, as I said, I wasn't really sure whether to become a priest or live the lay vocation. So I was interested in theology, so I went to Rome, which is cheap, and you can take a lot of classes. At least back then you could. So I went with a couple of friends from Steubenville, and I went to the Angelicum in Rome for a semester, and I went to Regina Apostolorum for a semester. And then when I was 19, moved back to D.C. to start taking classes at the Dominican House of Studies. And I was there for, I think, 3 years, finishing the coursework for my doctorate.
Okay, wow. So this kind of blows me away because, it's funny what you remember now. It would have been about 20 years ago when I was at Franciscan University from 2003 to 2006, I believe it was. Yeah, 2003 to 2006. And I was there for graduate studies. I remember coming across you in passing a few times, and I remember a lot of hair, by the way. And also, I would never have thought that you would have been that young at the time. So you're telling me you would have been probably 17, 18 years old at that time.
Yeah, if it was during my undergrad, I could have been visiting. I don't remember when we crossed paths exactly, but if I was just visiting, it might have been later. But while I was in school there, then I was 18 or younger.
All right, very cool. Yeah, so share with us then, during all of that time Anything you want to share, I guess, about the faith growing in your sense of it, your relationship with Christ, and your sense of being a man of Christ? Anything that jumps out to you? Any stories in terms of personal growth that you might want to share today?
Sure. So certainly one of the great points of genius, of distinctiveness of Franciscan universities, they have the household system. So being able to be accepted by a group of men, right, it almost operates like a frat, as you know, but a Christian Catholic frat with prayer times and sacramental commitments. And just that community was absolutely life-changing, to have all these older brother figures. Again, I'm the oldest in my family, so to really receive an opportunity to enter into community with these much more mature men who were willing to put up with me and to help form me. That was a game changer, no doubt about it. And then one thing that was important to my faith life was in Rome. You know, like I said, I was always kind of a little bit of a logic choppy guy, always a little too prone to argue. And there was once when I was in a logic class, and the professor and I disagreed about a certain logical symbol, and he was very gracious, and he waited after class and talked to me for a while. And I had been so certain that he was mistaken. I don't remember ever being so certain intellectually of anything. Anyway, at the end of our discussion, he showed that I was colossally wrong. And I remember walking out of that building, of the Angelicum, and thinking, thank God that I have the church's guidance to rely on and not just the reliance on my own reason. Because if I had been following my sense of certainty, not simply in some logical symbolism, but in terms of how to live as a man, how to serve the Lord, how to prepare for death, wow, I could cause a lot of damage. So that was a big change, because I was very dialectically minded, too intellectually prideful. I'm sure I still am, but that was a real fault. And I think that was a turning point, just being proven so colossally wrong and being grateful that God hadn't left me to my own devices in the ultimate things.
Awesome. John Mark Miravalle here with us. And so, through all this time, then share with us a little bit about that discernment of a vocation and the prudence involved. And then ultimately, you do discern marriage with your wife. Anything you can share with us along that line?
Yeah, so there's lots of great stories. One of them being the fact that my wife is an identical twin, and that got very confusing early on in all kinds of ways. But essentially, I had this idea, as I said, that with every other decision, you pray about it, you think about it, you make the best decision you can, and you go with it unless a door closes. But I had been told that vocation, priesthood, or marriage, that's different. That's a different caliber. It's a different category of decision-making. That with that one, you don't rely on prudence. You don't go through those steps of deliberation, judgment, and execution. You rely on a more mystical sensibility. So I was very hesitant to commit. I did think I wanted to be married, but I was very hesitant to commit because I was really afraid that I would screw up my life and someone else's, perhaps, if I made the wrong call. So two things really helped. One is I realized that the church uses the word vocation for any decision, all the way from following Christ to the vocation of the present moment. And that vocation was not an excuse to avoid prudence or going through the basic steps of prudence as Aquinas and the Catechism now outline. That was one thing, to say, oh, wait a minute, every decision is actually the same kind of decision. They're all vocations, the big ones and the little ones. The second thing I did is I went up to a kind of Ignatian-style retreat in Boston, and the priest said, let me tell you about a guy who made the wrong decision. Because I said, look, I'm terrified. If I make the right decision, I'll screw everything up. And he said, well, let me tell you about a guy. He was engaged to be married, and then he finds out his girlfriend's pregnant. So he prays about it, he thinks about it, he's a righteous guy, and he decides to break up with her quietly so she can marry this other guy. Well, that's St. Joseph, and he discerned wrong. And what does God say? Does God say, oh, Joseph, I had this great plan. You were going to have protodulia. You were going to be like the top male saint. But now you discerned wrongly, so I guess not for you. No, of course God doesn't do that. God lets him use his prudence as best he can, and then if God needs to amend the weakness in his prudence, he does. Man, that was what I needed. I needed the go-ahead to trust God enough to use my own imperfect faculties of decision-making, and then trust that if he needed to make some adjustment, he would. And so that's when I asked my girlfriend to marry me.
Wow, great insights here with John Mark Miravalle. So then, I guess where are we on the timeline then when you get engaged and then you get married? Are you in your graduate studies? Are you done with your graduate studies?
Yeah, so I was in D.C. I was young. I finished my coursework for the doctorate at 22. Now I need a job. I'm not yet engaged. I'm desperate to even find a high school job, and I can't find anything. Nobody's giving me any calls back. So a buddy of mine says, "Hey, I hear you need a job." I say, "Yes, I'm desperate. I'll take anything." He says, "Well, there's this thing in Kansas." I said, "Well, I'm not that desperate. I mean, gosh, I've never met anybody who's even been to Kansas." And my dad and my girlfriend at the time, now my wife, said, "Well, you just need a job. You just need to take whatever job you can get." So this is before I finished my doctorate, but I'm just writing the dissertation now, so I can kind of go anywhere. I take a job out with School of Faith in Kansas. It was based on the St. Lawrence Center at the University of Kansas, but now it's in the Archdiocese of Kansas City, Kansas. And I take that job, and while I'm at that job, I decide to definitively ask Jess to marry me. And anyway, I only gave a 2-year commitment, but we were out there for 8 years, and it was an incredible time. We got married, we had our first 3 kids, and I really learned a lot about how to be a Catholic man, how to pray, and how to teach during those 8 years.
Wow. Awesome. And so you do have your doctorate. So yeah, I've seen some of your bios in leading up to this. Didn't see the doctorate in there. Maybe you're pretty humble in your bios, but it would be then Dr. John Mark Miravalle, correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
All right, very good. We'll get that in there then. So Dr. John Mark Miravalle here with us. And so this time in Kansas, you mentioned that this would have been a time of some great fruitfulness in prayer and just developing as a man of God. Anything you want to share with us in there that might be helpful for all of us as we are striving to advance?
Yeah, so what I tell every guy here when if anybody discerns out, if they decide they're not going to be a priest and they come to my office and they say, "Have any advice?" I say, yeah, my first piece of advice, you got to find somebody holier than you are to hang out with regularly. So that's what I got in Kansas. I had these 2 wonderful coworkers, Mike Schurslicht and Troy Hinkle, still among my best friends. And they were each 10 years or more older than I was, but I was able to just sit around the table with them. We planned our lessons. We were teaching college students. We were teaching parishioners. We were teaching the faculties of Catholic schools. And as we were sitting around planning out where we would teach, what we would teach, one of them would just randomly say, how's your prayer life? What you been praying about? How are the kids? And so it was this incredible sense of a work community that was also a spiritual community. And I don't think many people have ever had that. So that was actually part of what gave me the courage to start my own family, was to be welcomed into their families and to their experience of fatherhood and Christian manhood. So I'm grateful. I'm eternally grateful, not just because they gave me my first job, but because they let me be part of their lives in that way.
Yeah, outstanding. Yeah, so that theme of that great gift of a virtuous brotherhood, you heard it when John Mark was at Franciscan in Steubenville with the household system and the fruitfulness there in that virtuous brotherhood. You hear it there as he's in Kansas for those years, and again, finding some good brothers in Christ that are living it, are striving to live it. And we need that. Now, we can't always make that happen. So if that's something that you're desiring and don't currently have, again, prudence, we can look around and we can be reasonable about this, put ourselves in situations to be around folks that we'd want to be around, right? But also to, bring that to prayer and say, God, help me with this. Lead me in the right direction. Show me some good brothers that I can have in you. We're going to be right back. Stay tuned. Back to the Simple Truth. Jim Havens here. Testimony Tuesday with our guest today, Dr. John Mark Miravalle. He's a Catholic husband and father, a professor of moral theology, systematic and moral theology, also an author, and getting into his good work. So he spent some time in Kansas. We were talking about that in the last segment, some fruitful time in Kansas. And so that must have been difficult to spend. I think you said 8 years in Kansas, and then to move from there, from a good, fruitful environment where you got some good friends, some good brotherhood, some good community, some good Catholic community. What was that like? And then where'd you go from there?
So again, 8 years, and not only have a great work life, but there was a lot of great Catholic families around us. My wife was really connected to a lot of great moms. So my first couple of years there, I'd kind of planned on something like an academic career, and the Kansas job was not really that. It was in many ways much better because we had to go out and convince college students to take our classes, convince the adult parishioners to take our classes, and then the Archbishop sent us into the Catholic school faculties, and that was often an audience of folks who didn't really want to be there. So it was an incredible training in engaging with people who are not necessarily sold on what you're offering. Anyway, so after about 4 or 5 years of trying to apply to universities, I said, what am I doing? I love it here. I love this situation. This is where I want to stay. And so my wife and I talked about it, and we decided to buy, a big house. We'd been there 8 years. We got pregnant with our fourth. And while I was in Kansas, the local atheist society at the University of Kansas asked me to do a debate with Dan Barker, who's the head of the Freedom from Religion Foundation. He's, I guess, the most experienced atheist debater in the world. It was his 90th debate and my first. So I did that debate, which went well, except my voice got too high. I'd been watching too much Seinfeld, so I started talking to him. Anyway, a lot of mean comments on the YouTube channel, right? A lot of people saying that I was trying to prove God's existence to bats because they were the only ones who could hear that high. But then I also started doing some other debates. I did a debate on same-sex marriage with one of the leading gay philosophers in the country. My dad and I did a team debate with two kind of fairly well-known atheist personalities. So those got some YouTube traffic. And anyway, right before we were about to buy the house that we would stay in forever in Kansas, I get a phone call from a buddy working at Mount St. Mary's Seminary out here in Emmitsburg, Maryland. And he said, hey, the rector saw your debates, and he wants to know if you'd be interested to come here and teach seminarians. So let me just say real quick, it is one of the, I do think it's the amazing thing in my life that I've never gotten a job I applied for. I've applied for dozens and dozens of jobs. I've never even gotten an interview. The only jobs I've gotten were jobs that somebody just threw at me. So it's really great because I've really done nothing. Like, I'm just born into a faithful family, got to go to school for free, and then God has shown me that every time I try to do something by my own effort, it fails. Just raw gift. And it's really almost painfully obvious that I've achieved virtually nothing. So when the rector called, he said, do you want to come out to the seminary? I said, no, not really. We're happy here. And I said, and I think it's important for me to teach not just Catholics, but ex-Catholics and non-Catholics and non-Christians and people who don't know if they want to be Catholic. And the rector was on the phone and he said, well, priests need to know how to do that too. And so I said, all right, I'll come out for an interview. And I came out, and it was a beautiful place and just incredible spirit. I can talk about that later, but this seminary is just an unbelievable place. Anyway, the next morning I came to daily mass, and when you go in a beautiful chapel and you hear 160 guys singing and praying, and then watch them on their knees in silence after mass ends, I said, are you telling me my family could come to mass with guys? And they said, yeah. And so then I called my wife. I said, this really might be the best thing for our family.
Wow. Yeah, that's incredible. And maybe you could just share a little bit, because I think, as you mentioned, the nature of receiving the great gifts that God gives us, which look different. We all have different stories, but every single one of us has received just unbelievable gifts from God. And we could start with just the gift of our very life, but then yes, all of the graces poured out for us if we have found our home in the Catholic faith, in the Catholic Church. What a gift if we have come to understand our Lord Jesus and the gift of himself on the cross poured out for us in this fruit of the Holy Eucharist. What a gift, our baptism, all the sacraments. So there is so much there. But just in terms of talking about the nature of receiving the gifts that you have received and that perspective that you have, it strikes me, though, that there is a great difficulty in receiving these gifts, especially the special difficulty of not taking them for granted, the special difficulty of not being spoiled, of understanding what we really have been given, especially when maybe we don't have that perspective to understand, I guess, the other side of what life would be like if we didn't have these gifts, to really appreciate them and then to really live them out of that appreciation. Is there anything that you can share about that and your perspective and just understanding your life and all of the gifts you've been given?
Yeah. So again, in my case, it's pretty easy. I didn't choose my faith. I was born into it. I didn't choose my university. I didn't even choose my major. I didn't choose my Rome school. I mean, Dad was, and my mom, but they were all very like, you should do this. Okay. You should do this. Okay. My wife came to meet me. I was actually trying to meet another girl when my wife approached me and started a conversation. Like I said, none of the jobs I tried to get, I got. So my kids, right? I certainly did not plan these kids. Those showed up without my sort of pushing a button. I didn't have them in mind, let's say, before they showed up. So to me, it's just really clear. Everything that has made me most happy is not my doing. And so one of the big, when I teach a morals class, a fundamental morals class, it's a whole year. The last class is on gratitude and on the importance of the Sabbath as the day of gratitude, where you remember that what God has already done is more important than anything you still have yet to do. So that to me is the practice where you remember, hey, nothing I did got me here. So nothing I have yet to do is as crucial as what God's going to do. And I think just a little reflection, probably for everybody, makes that fairly self-evident.
Yeah, John Mark Miravalle with us here, and share more with us then about. Let me ask you this about the book. So I see that the first title that I'm seeing listed here goes back to 2010, "The Drug, the Soul, and God: A Catholic Moral Perspective on Antidepressants." It seems like then the 2020 book, "How to Feel Good and How Not to," maybe flowing from that 10 years later. What can you share with us about the writing and about the sense of putting this work forward as an author?
That's a great question. I'll give just a couple pieces here. So one is I was looking for a dissertation. Again, I thought I would do something in systematics or some real speculative philosophy. And Dad said, do morals. You've got enough on the speculative side in your background. So I picked a dissertation on morals. The goal when you pick a dissertation, do something someone else hasn't picked yet. So I picked antidepressants, and that would be a longer discussion. But I do think that people do not know how to delight well. And because they don't know how to delight well and what to delight in, they do not know how to suffer well. And that's a pretty bold claim, but I'd stand by it. And I would say both that original dissertation and the book on beauty, which is about delight, and now also this book on alcohol, marijuana, and also antidepressants, it's fundamentally about, and it's connected to what we were just talking about with gratitude. The fundamental thing that people, I think, really need to learn how to do is delight in the good. And once you do that, you have this reservoir built in that helps you to endure the evil. And without those two skills, man, you're going to fall apart in every area of life. And you're going to hang on to non-virtuous delights and non-virtuous consolations during times of suffering. So those have been some of the ideas that have been consistent through those books.
Yeah, outstanding. Yeah, I really, really like the way that you put things together in the book that I read, front to back, and really spent some time reflecting as I went, beauty, what it is and why it matters. And really like, your sense of the way that your mind works and the way that you put it on the page with such, precision, right order, but also, that the clarity and just laying it out well, right? So that one can really understand what you're seeing and what you're putting forth, which in this book on beauty, I would just say seems right right on target. And I think the part that there's so much that resonated in this, and we're going to dive deep into this book next week with Dr. John Mark Miravalle. But just one thing to kind of preview, and that is, that sense of the moral life being beautiful, right? And that you don't hear that talked about much, but that's really what it is. It is beautiful to live a moral life, and the moral life laid out for us is an invitation into beauty. Anything that you want to share about that quickly here before we talk a little bit more about your other work?
Yeah, just again, delight. Our Lady is, I talk about this in the more recent book, but Our Lady is often rightly seen as the model of suffering. But she's also the model of delight. She's the one who rejoices in the Lord because he's done great things for her. And that, in a sense, that has to come first. If you don't know how to delight well, then you're not going to know how to suffer well. And beauty is one of the frameworks you can use to habitually delight in the good things that God has done. And actually, this exercise we're doing right now, the Lord has done great things for me. The only proper response is delightful amazement at how good the Lord has been. And only if that's like the baseline foundation will I be able to handle any of the tough stuff that comes my way.
Yeah. Share with us, I guess, a little bit of the tough stuff, a little sense of, we're called to pick up the cross each day, as our Lord said. Take up your cross each day, come follow me. And again, there's a sense of great beauty in that if we see it rightly. What about that in your work at Mount St. Mary's? With the priest, we'll get into more of it after the break. But anything you can share with us just about, and even as a husband and a father in your vocation there, picking up that cross each day. What do you think? What do you think about? What do you focus on? What's helpful to you?
Yeah, for me, it's very clear. Again, we've kind of been over my story. It's been a very easy story. So I'm very clear that my greatest crosses are of my own making. I'm very clear that the invisible backpack, in my case, is just my vice. So, for instance, one of the things that's a little challenging is I'll go around giving talks at parishes or in the classroom, and I'll look like a really happy, virtuous guy. And because I can't really share my deepest vices, right, because that wouldn't go well with the talk, that'd be disedifying. So trying to tell the kids and tell my wife and make sure my confessor knows, hey, I am a bit of a professional hypocrite, and I need at least somebody to recognize that. Because it is hard to present the full truth and goodness of the faith, and to know during every talk and every lecture that you're not living up to it. And to know that your kids know that, and that your wife knows that, and that your God knows that is something that you just have to shoulder, and you have to just keep going with.
Yeah, what is the line? I think the preacher preaches to himself first, right? I think we could say that about a good teacher too. We're teaching ourselves as well. We're striving to live it ourselves. We're going to be right back. Stay tuned. Back to the Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with Dr. John Mark Miravalle. And remember, he's going to be back with us again next week to dive deep into his book on beauty, what it is and why it matters. You can get it at SophiaInstitute.com. That's SophiaInstitute.com. And here, just final segment here. We're wrapping up on Testimony Tuesday. He's sharing some of his story with us. There's a lot more that I could ask, and would love to ask about the good work that you're doing, John Mark. But at the same time, I just have a sense to let you have the floor. Anything that you want to share with us today, anything that you want to make sure to get across before we wrap up today, feel free.
Well, thank you so much. And first of all, I'd like to get across how grateful I am for your generosity and your graciousness and in all your words during this last hour. I don't know much to add except that I'm very grateful to be unworthily serving now the future priests of the church. And I do love telling people, because this is my job now at Mount St. Mary's, that the cavalry's coming. We have such good priests working here. We have such virtuous young men preparing to be priests, and to see their energy, their orthodoxy, and their normalcy, just their basic human nature being generally very balanced and ordered, non-confrontational, non-anxious, politicized. It's just a breath of fresh air. So that's one part of my story, just because it's something I see that a lot of people don't get to see. Certainly not a lot of lay people get to see from the inside. And it's really been super edifying and super encouraging. So for everybody who's worried, the hierarchy, the clergy, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, actually, there's a lot of good things going on in the hierarchy and the clergy, especially coming down the pike.
Thanks be to God. All right. And so I guess one thing I would love for you to speak to is, I don't know, is your doctorate in philosophy?
No. So I got a license in systematics and a doctorate in morals, but then I've also written a couple books now on philosophy, and I actually teach philosophy as well as moral and systematic theology here at the seminary. In fact, I'm sort of the coordinator of the philosophy program for the men here at the seminary. Again, with all those debates and stuff, I wound up doing a fair bit of philosophy along the way, so I've been able to develop that a little bit.
Okay, yeah. My sense when I was reading the book Beauty that you wrote was certainly there's a lot in there theologically, but mostly the philosophy was really coming out, which I was really appreciating. And so a lot of people, it's hard to maybe understand. Maybe they've never had a theology teacher or a philosophy teacher who's grounded in the Catholic faith, really just lay out very basically how to understand what philosophy is, what theology is, how they go together. Can you just share a little bit with us about that today?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you so much. I am very passionate about this. So theology is where we try to understand what God has revealed in Jesus Christ through the Bible and through the teachings of the church. So it's the highest truths we can know. But philosophy is where we try to understand what everybody knows just by being human, but hasn't reflected on. So philosophy studies what is accessible by means of universal experience. That's really cool. That's really important, because it means that philosophy gives you the most common ground there is. If you have some philosophical training, that means you understand a little bit about the universe, a little bit about the human person, a little bit about causes, a little bit about logic. Then what's really awesome is you can talk to anybody about important stuff, whether they're atheists or Buddhists, right, or Hindus or Christians or Catholics. So in a pluralistic society where you never know what the guy across the street is thinking or where he comes from, philosophy is your bedrock. And that's why John Paul II said that without philosophy, you really can't do evangelization anymore, because philosophy is the basic place where we meet people who don't share our faith. So I'm a big believer in sort of broadening philosophical literacy among Catholics. There's been great work in making sure Catholics know the Bible, making sure Catholics understand the moral teachings, making sure Catholics understand the theology of the body. I really encourage people out there to also, if they're interested in sharing the faith with friends, family, or just the guy on the airplane, to really try to build up a little bit of philosophical background so that you can talk to anybody about almost anything.
And is this really the subject of your latest book, Thinking Clearly, Catholic Philosophy for a Culture in Chaos?
Yes, that's right. It's just a very basic introduction to Catholic philosophy concepts with like practice scenarios so that you can really build these bridges to whomever.
Okay, outstanding. Yeah, that's terrific. Again, Thinking Clearly, Catholic Philosophy for a Culture in Chaos. And I believe that one is our Sunday Visitor, but I'm sure you can find it there or wherever you can find good books. I'm sure you can find that one as well. But yeah, and anything else on that where, we only have a couple minutes, but anything, I guess, just on a basic level for people if they want to get started, just to whet that appetite, what would you share with them as maybe just a foundational thing to keep in mind along the lines of what you're talking about?
Yeah, well, let me back up real quick, and I'm sure your listeners already know this, but I'd be really deficient if I didn't say it. As I said before, I like to argue too much. I have an inclination towards logic choppy, towards dialectic, towards dicing things up. The first thing to remember, of course, is that daily prayer is the only thing that can keep your faith solid, or anyone else's faith solid. So like as a dad, again, it was another switch in my head where about a couple years ago, I thought, I got to be careful. I'm spending more time giving them apologetic defenses than I am training them in the habit of daily prayer. And that's stupid, because that makes it think like my arguments are going to do a better job than a relationship with the Lord. So step one is to remember, if you're learning the arguments, if you're learning the ideas, the concepts, but you're not praying, then you're really putting the cart before the horse. So with that in place, then step two, I just think means try to understand the bedrock where you and a non-believer can agree. And that's getting, with stuff like the multiverse and transgenderism, the denial of causation, and all kinds of skeptical theories out there. That's getting hard, and it's getting harder, but it's still possible, because the only way you can lead someone to the truth is if you find some portion of the truth that the other person accepts already, and you can go from there. Pope Francis talks a lot about accompaniment, and that's actually true. You got to start out where people are, and you got to do that intellectually too. And again, philosophy is the best way to do that. Say, what does this person who believes in all these crazy ideas, what can we agree on? And let's begin with that and see where it takes us.
All right. I have time to slip in one more lightning round type question. Who's your favorite philosopher and why?
Well, certainly Thomas Aquinas is the official sort of philosopher of the church. So if you got to find out what he thought about something before you think about it. But then I got to say, I do love, and it's all through the Beauty Book, I do think G.K. Chesterton is the greatest non-organized philosopher out there. And he's a philosopher who doesn't just illuminate reality, but he makes you happy about it. So anything that anybody can read by him, fiction or nonfiction, boy, do I recommend that.
Wow, outstanding. Well, thank you so much for being with us today, and we're looking forward to having you back next week to talk about your book, Beauty, what it is and why it matters. Dr. John Mark Miravalle. And want to again invite people to get this book. Maybe you can start reading it a little bit before next week. You can go to SophiaInstitute.com. That's SophiaInstitute.com. And we're going to dive deep into this book and have a good time doing it. I think you're going to find it very, not only informative and helpful, but just very refreshing as well. Something that's going to refresh your soul, your mind, and I think it'll be